James Mercer had always prided himself on being ordinary. He lived in a modest brownstone in Chicago, worked as a purchasing manager for a paper company, and took great satisfaction in the predictability of his life. His wife, Eleanor, often teased him about his unadventurous nature. "A man who eats the same lunch every day," she'd say, shaking her head with an affectionate smile, "will one day find excitement has passed him by entirely." James never minded the joke, until the night the phone rang. It was 12:20 a.m., when the sharp trill of the telephone cut through the quiet. James, already half asleep, blinked into the darkness of the bedroom. The glow of Eleanor's empty side of the bed, her pillow untouched for 3 weeks while she recuperated in a Colorado spa, gave him a strange sense of vulnerability. Who would call at such an hour? It couldn't be Eleanor. She knew the time difference. His hand hesitated over the receiver before he picked it up. "Hello?" His voice was dry, cautious. Silence. "Hello?" he repeated, more forcefully this time. He heard the faintest hitch in the air. Was it breathing? Static hummed faintly, like a whisper. Then, nothing. Annoyed, James hung up and returned to bed. He told himself it was a wrong number, a fluke. But as he lay staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the call had been meant for him. The next morning, the phone call was all but forgotten in the busyness of the day. James dove into work, numbly signing off on invoices and placating suppliers who always seemed to think their orders were the only ones that mattered. It wasn't until he returned home that evening, exhausted and eager for silence, that the ordinary cracked once more. There was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" James called out, already loosening his tie. "Detective Paul Stanton, Chicago PD." James frowned, then opened the door. The man standing there was tall and thin, with a suit that looked like it had been tailored 10 years too early for his frame. Stanton's face was impassive, but his eyes were like drills, sharp, probing, and unwilling to leave anything unexamined. "Mr. Mercer?" Stanton asked. "Yes? May I come in?" James hesitated. "What's this about?" "It's about Vivian Grant." James blinked. "I don't know anyone named Vivian Grant." Stanton's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Funny. She knew you." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. James closed the door, his irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. "Look, Detective, I don't know who—" "She died last night," Stanton interrupted. "Suicide, apparently. Her maid found her this morning. Gas. You know the kind." James felt his breath catch. "That's terrible, but—" "We found something interesting at the scene," Stanton said, pulling out a small notebook. "Her phone was off the hook. We traced the last number she dialed." He looked up, his eyes boring into James's. "Care to guess whose number it was?" For a moment, James couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Then, finding his voice, he said, "You think she called me?" Stanton tilted his head. "Not just think, Mr. Mercer. We know." James stood frozen in the middle of his living room, feeling as if the floor had given way beneath him. Detective Stanton, unbothered by James's discomfort, wandered the room, his eyes flitting over the modest furniture and stacks of books piled in corners. He seemed in no hurry to clarify the situation. "I'm sorry," James said at last, his voice cracking slightly. "You're saying this woman, this Vivian Grant, called me, before she—" "Died. Yes." Stanton glanced at him with a faint smile. "Odd, isn't it? You claim you didn't know her, yet you were the last person she tried to reach." James felt a prickle of irritation beneath his unease. "You don't call the wrong number on purpose, Detective." "True," Stanton agreed. "But let's assume for a moment it wasn't a wrong number. Let's assume she intended to call you." James ran a hand through his hair, the beginnings of a headache forming at his temples. "This is ridiculous. I don't know her. I've never even heard the name Vivian Grant before today." "Then how do you explain the call?" "I can't," James snapped, his frustration spilling over. "For all I know, she misdialed. Stanton raised his eyebrows but said nothing. He wandered to a side table, where a framed photograph of Eleanor sat, her smile bright and warm. Your wife? Yes. She's not here, I take it? No. She's been away for a few weeks. Colorado. Health retreat. Ah. Stanton placed the photo back carefully. That must be hard, being alone. James stiffened. I managed just fine. Of course. Stanton tapped his notebook with a finger. Just for the record, where were you last night around midnight? James frowned. At home. Asleep. Alone? Yes. Unless you count the cat. Stanton scribbled something in his notebook, then closed it with a snap. All right, Mr. Mercer. I think that'll do for now. For now, James repeated, incredulous. You've barged into my home, accused me of I don't even know what, and now you're just leaving? I haven't accused you of anything, Stanton said smoothly. I'm just asking questions, and I have a feeling we'll need to ask more before this is over. He moved toward the door, pausing as he reached for the handle. One last thing, Mr. Mercer. Why would you bother picking up a phone call while you were sleeping soundly and in the middle of the night on top of that? James froze, his heart stuttering in his chest. What? The phone call, Stanton said casually. The one Vivian made to you before she died. You picked up, didn't you? James opened his mouth, closed it again. His throat felt dry. It could have been my wife for all I know, and there was no one on the line, he muttered. Just silence. Stanton tilted his head, studying James for a long moment. Silence, you say? All right. He smiled faintly. Have a good evening, Mr. Mercer. The door clicked shut, leaving James in silence. He stood motionless for several moments, his heart pounding in his ears. Then he moved to the phone, picked it up, and stared at it. The dial gleamed faintly under the light. The next morning, James awoke to the harsh chime of the alarm clock. For a moment he lay still, letting the fragments of the previous night drift back into place. The phone call. The detective. Vivian Grant. Her name hovered in his mind like a foreign object he couldn't quite place. A piece of someone else's life, shoved awkwardly into his own. By the time he got to the office, James had managed to bury the unease under the mundane weight of purchase orders and delivery schedules. He worked diligently, avoiding conversation. But the world outside his paperwork seemed more brittle than usual. The idle chatter of his co-workers grated on him. The endless ring of telephones set his teeth on edge. It was just before lunch when the world cracked again. James, came the clipped voice of his boss, Mr. Carroll. There's a call for you. Line 3. James frowned. He rarely received personal calls at the office. He crossed the room, picked up the receiver, and spoke cautiously. This is James Mercer. You'll want to come down to the precinct, said Detective Stanton's familiar voice. There was no preamble, no trace of politeness. There are some things you should see. James gripped the phone tighter. What things? Details about Vivian Grant, Stanton said coolly. Might jog your memory. We'll be expecting you. Before James could protest, the line went dead. When James arrived at the precinct, Stanton greeted him with the faintest ghost of a smirk, the kind of expression that made it clear he already knew the answers to the questions he was about to ask. This way, Stanton said, leading James down a corridor lined with buzzing fluorescent lights. They entered a small room where another man, heavy-set and dour, stood waiting with a folder in hand. Mr. Mercer, Stanton said, gesturing to the other man. This is Detective Hargrove. He's been working the case with me. Hargrove gave a perfunctory nod, then flipped open the folder and spread its contents on the table. Photos. Receipts. A grainy black-and-white image of a woman who must have been Vivian Grant stared up at James. Recognize her? Stanton asked. No, James said firmly. Take another look, Stanton urged. James bent closer. Vivian was beautiful, in a sharp-edged sort of way. Dark hair curled at her shoulders, framing a face that seemed both poised and vulnerable, She looked like the kind of woman who drew attention without asking for it, who might have been at home in an expensive cocktail bar or under the harsh glow of a courtroom. No, James repeated. I don't know her. Stanton exchanged a glance with Hargrove. Funny thing, Stanton said, leaning against the table. She seems to have known you. Found this in her coat pocket. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a receipt. James's heart lurched when he saw the logo at the top. Chez Marcel, a small French restaurant he often visited for lunch. The date printed at the bottom sent a chill through him. January 4th, 3 days after Eleanor had left for Colorado. James struggled to keep his voice steady. This doesn't prove anything. It's a popular restaurant. Anyone could have been there. Sure, Stanton said. Only we've spoken to the staff there. Turns out you're something of a regular, Mr. Mercer. Every Tuesday and Thursday, right? Even sat in the same corner most times. James's mouth went dry. I don't see what that has to do with... And wouldn't you know it, Stanton continued, his voice light but pressing. Vivian Grant was a regular too. Same days, same corner. Seems like quite the coincidence. That doesn't mean I knew her, James said, his voice rising slightly. Lots of people go to Chez Marcel. I keep to myself. Hargrove snorted, but Stanton remained focused. Maybe. Or maybe you struck up a little friendship. Could have been something innocent, sure. But for her to end up dead and calling you as her last act? That doesn't scream coincidence to me, Mr. Mercer. James shook his head, his palms sweating. You're trying to connect dots that don't exist. I've told you. I don't know her. Stanton smiled faintly. And yet, she called you. Curious, isn't it? Before James could respond, Stanton tapped the table twice, signaling the end of the discussion. We're not done, Mr. Mercer. Not by a long shot. Back in his car, James gripped the steering wheel and stared blankly at the windshield. The evidence, the phone call, the receipt, the restaurant, was a storm building around him. And no matter how many times he denied knowing Vivian Grant, the pieces seemed to slot together against him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was a question he hadn't dared let himself consider until now. What if somehow Vivian Grant really had known him? By the time James arrived home that evening, exhaustion had seeped into his bones. Every step up the brownstone's narrow staircase felt like a monumental effort, every sound in the quiet building setting his nerves on edge. He unlocked his door, stepped inside, and flicked on the light. James? The voice stopped him cold. He turned, his heart leaping as Eleanor stepped into view from the living room, her suitcase by her feet. She looked radiant, her skin bronzed from weeks of crisp Colorado air, her auburn hair falling in soft waves around her face. But there was a flicker of concern in her hazel eyes. You're home early, James said, managing a weak smile. I thought you weren't back until tomorrow. They finished the treatments a day ahead, she said, studying him. Surprised you didn't get my telegram. James winced. He hadn't checked the mail that day. Must have missed it, he muttered. Welcome back. Eleanor tilted her head, her smile cautious. You look terrible, James. Have you been sleeping? James moved past her, dropping his keys onto the table with a metallic clatter. It's been a long week. Work's been intense. Work? She repeated, crossing her arms. Or something else? The question hung in the air, unspoken worries flickering between them. Eleanor was sharp, sharper than James liked to admit sometimes, and he could see she wasn't convinced by his answer. She moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. James, what's wrong? She asked softly. For a brief moment, he considered telling her everything. The phone call, the detectives, Vivian Grant's death. But how could he explain it when he barely understood it himself? How could he tell her that their quiet, predictable life was unraveling under the weight of something neither of them could see? Nothing, he said finally, forcing a smile. Just tired. Let's not spoil your homecoming. Eleanor studied him a moment longer, then sighed. "All right," she said. "But you're not off the hook. You're going to tell me what's bothering you eventually." James chuckled weakly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I missed you," he said. And for once, it felt like the only truthful thing he'd said all day. The next morning, James awoke to the sound of the phone ringing. He bolted upright, heart racing, but Eleanor reached over and picked it up first. "Hello?" she said, her voice groggy. A pause. "Yes, he's here. One moment." She handed the phone to James, frowning. "It's for you." James took the receiver, his throat tightening. "This is James Mercer." "It's Stanton," came the voice on the other end. "Sorry to bother you so early, Mr. Mercer, but we need you to come down to the station again. Something new's come up." James clenched his jaw. "I've already told you." "You'll want to hear this," Stanton said, cutting him off. "Trust me." The line went dead. Eleanor was watching him when he hung up, her expression uneasy. "James, what's going on?" He forced a casual tone. "Work. They're, having some issues with an order. I need to go in for a bit." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Since when does work call you at home? On a Saturday?" "Since deadlines don't care about weekends," James said lightly, grabbing his jacket. "I won't be long." Before Eleanor could press further, he was out the door. At the precinct, Stanton didn't waste time with pleasantries. He led James to the same small room as before, where Hargrove was already waiting. A new item lay on the table between them, a ring, simple but elegant, with a small ruby at its center. "This belong to you?" Stanton asked, gesturing to the ring. James frowned. "No. Why?" "We found it in Vivian Grant's apartment," Stanton said. "Her husband claims she didn't own it before he left for his trip. Says it must have been a recent gift." James shook his head. "I've never seen it before." "Sure about that?" Stanton's voice was calm, but his gaze was razor-sharp. "Because we're tracing its origin, Mr. Mercer. We'll find out who bought it." James's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Trace away," he said. "You won't find anything connecting it to me." Hargrove snorted. "You've got an answer for everything, don't you?" Stanton raised a hand, silencing his partner. "All right, Mr. Mercer. That's all for now. But I'd start thinking carefully about anything you might have forgotten. You wouldn't want us to find a surprise, would you?" James left the precinct feeling as if the walls were closing in. The detectives were relentless, twisting every scrap of evidence into a noose. And worst of all, a tiny part of him, the part he hated most, wondered if they were right. Could there be something he'd forgotten? Something he couldn't explain? Back home, Eleanor was waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed. "You lied," she said, before he could speak. "That wasn't about work." James froze. "Eleanor." "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't lie to me, James. What's going on?" For a moment, all he could do was stare at her. The weight of the past few days pressed down on him like a physical force, and he knew there was no way out but the truth. "It's complicated," he said finally, his voice low. "But I'll tell you everything." James paced the living room, his mind racing to piece together the right way to explain everything. Eleanor sat on the couch, her arms crossed tightly, her expression a mix of worry and anger. The silence between them felt heavy, like a storm on the verge of breaking. "Start talking, James," Eleanor said finally. Her voice was firm, but there was a tremor in it, a hint of fear that twisted the knife in James's chest. He stopped pacing and turned to face her. 3 nights ago, I got a phone call. It woke me up in the middle of the night. When I answered, there was no one there. Just silence. I thought it was a wrong number and went back to bed." Eleanor frowned. "And that's why the police are involved? A silent phone call?" "It's more than that," James admitted. He sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The next evening, a detective came to the house. He told me about a woman named Vivian Grant. She died that night. Suicide. And they traced her last phone call to me. Eleanor's eyes widened. What? How is that even possible? You don't know her, do you? James shook his head. No, at least I don't think I do. But the detectives seem to think otherwise. They're convinced there's some connection between us. Why? James hesitated. They found a receipt in her coat, from Chez Marcel. Eleanor's brow furrowed. The French place near your office? Yes. Apparently she was a regular there, just like me. They think we might have met, that maybe we knew each other. Did you? Eleanor's voice was sharp now, her eyes locked onto his. No, James said firmly. At least not intentionally. It's a small restaurant. Maybe we were there at the same time once or twice, but I don't remember her, I swear. Eleanor studied him, her gaze searching. That's not all, is it? James sighed. No. Today, they showed me something else. A ring they found in her apartment. They think it might have been a recent gift, and now they're trying to trace where it came from, to see who bought it. Eleanor's face went pale. And they think... They're fishing, James said quickly. They don't have anything solid. It's all circumstantial, coincidences they're trying to string together. But I can't shake the feeling that they're not going to stop until they find something. For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. Then she stood, walking to the window and staring out at the street below. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. James, is there anything you're not telling me? Anything you've forgotten? James felt a flash of anger, but swallowed it down. No, Eleanor. I've told you everything. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You've been under so much stress lately. Are you sure? You'd tell me if you'd done something, wouldn't you? I haven't done anything, James snapped, louder than he intended. Eleanor flinched, and guilt surged through him. He softened his tone. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell, but you have to believe me, Eleanor. I don't know this woman. I don't know why she called me. Eleanor nodded slowly, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. All right, James. I'll believe you. For now. That night, James lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Eleanor was asleep beside him, her breathing soft and steady, but her earlier words echoed in his mind. Are you sure? He wasn't. The truth was, the constant pressure from Stanton and Hargrove had wormed its way into his thoughts. Every coincidence, every unanswered question, they all pointed to something he couldn't explain. And the worst part? A tiny, insidious voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe, somehow, the detectives were right. At 2 a.m., the phone rang again. James bolted upright, his heart hammering in his chest. Eleanor stirred beside him, mumbling something incoherent. He reached for the receiver with trembling hands. Hello? His voice was hoarse. Silence. Who is this? He demanded, his voice rising. What do you want? There was no response, only the faint hiss of static. James slammed the phone down, his hands shaking. Eleanor was awake now, sitting up with a worried expression. James? Who was it? No one, he muttered, his voice hollow. Just another silent call. Eleanor reached for his arm. James, this is getting out of hand. You need to tell the detectives about this. He shook his head. They'll just use it as more fuel against me. I can't. But even as he said it, James knew Eleanor was right. The calls weren't random. Someone, somehow, was trying to send him a message. The question was who, and why. The next morning, James felt like a man walking to his own execution. The weight of the silent phone call pressed heavily on him, and though Eleanor hadn't said much over breakfast, the tension in the room had been palpable. Her worry was like a spectre hovering at the edge of his vision, and he hated the way it made him feel. Cornered. Guilty. When he arrived at work, his routine did little to distract him. The familiar clatter of typewriters and the hum of conversation felt distant, like a radio playing in another room. By mid-morning, he found himself staring at his desk phone, half expecting it to ring again. But it didn't. Not until just past noon, when Stanton called. "Mr. Mercer," Stanton said, his tone brisk. "We need you to come in." James gritted his teeth. "Detective, I've told you everything I know." "Sure you have," Stanton replied, not missing a beat. "But we've got a new development you'll want to hear about." "What development?" James asked, his throat tightening. "Come to the precinct," Stanton said. "I'll explain everything." James closed his eyes, his hand tightening around the receiver. "Fine. I'll be there." When he arrived, Stanton was waiting for him in the same cramped interrogation room. This time, though, there was no sign of Hargrove. Instead, Stanton was alone, a folder spread open on the table in front of him. "Have a seat," Stanton said, gesturing casually. James sat, his stomach churning. "What's this about?" Stanton leaned forward, clasping his hands. "You'll be glad to know we've traced the ruby ring we found in Vivian Grant's apartment." James's pulse quickened. "And?" "It was purchased 3 weeks ago at a small jewelry shop downtown," Stanton said, watching James carefully. "Paid for in cash." James frowned. "So? What does that have to do with me?" Stanton smirked, pulling a slip of paper from the folder and sliding it across the table. It was a receipt from the jewelry shop, dated the same day as the purchase. Written at the bottom was a name that made James's stomach drop. J. Mercer. James stared at the receipt, his hands cold. This has to be a mistake." "Does it?" Stanton asked, tilting his head. "Because it seems pretty clear to me." "I didn't buy this ring," James said, his voice rising. "I've never even been to that shop." "Are you sure?" Stanton said, his tone almost mocking. "You'd be surprised what people forget." "I didn't buy it," James repeated, his chest tightening. "Someone must have used my name." Stanton shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe you did buy it, and you just don't want to admit it." James shot to his feet. "I've had enough of this. You can't keep dragging me in here based on flimsy coincidences." Stanton leaned back in his chair, unbothered by James's outburst. "Here's the thing, Mr. Mercer. A woman is dead. She called you before she died. And now we've got a ring that seems to connect you to her. Coincidence or not, it's starting to look like you've got something to hide." James shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. "I don't know her. I didn't buy that ring. And I didn't do anything wrong." Stanton smiled faintly. "All right, Mr. Mercer, have it your way. But if there's something you're not telling us, now's the time to come clean. Because once we connect all the dots, it'll be too late." James left the precinct in a daze. The receipt had shaken him to his core. How could his name have ended up on it? Had someone forged it? Framed him? The questions buzzed in his mind like angry wasps, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't swat them away. When he got home, Eleanor was waiting for him in the living room, her face pale. "What happened?" she asked the moment he walked through the door. James hesitated, then sank onto the couch beside her. He told her everything, about the ring, the receipt, and Stanton's relentless accusations. By the time he finished, Eleanor was staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "This is insane," she said. "You didn't buy that ring, did you?" "No," James said firmly. "But someone's trying to make it look like I did." "Who would do that?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "And why?" "I don't know," James admitted. "But whoever it is, they're doing a damn good job." Eleanor reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll figure this out, James. We'll prove you didn't have anything to do with it." Her words were meant to be comforting, but James couldn't shake the gnawing doubt in the back of his mind. What if proving his innocence wasn't as simple as finding the truth? What if the truth was something he wasn't ready to face? James couldn't remember the last time he'd felt at peace. Even the simple comforts of home, the quiet hum of the radiator, the scent of coffee brewing in the morning, felt tainted by the growing storm surrounding him. The receipt with his name had driven a wedge deeper into his life, and though Eleanor's faith in him remained steadfast on the surface, He could see the cracks forming. She didn't say it outright, but James caught the way her eyes lingered on him, searching for something he couldn't name. Her questions became more frequent, her silences heavier. He couldn't blame her. If he were in her position, he'd have doubts too. It was in the middle of one of those silences, 3 days after the incident with the ring, that the phone rang again. James froze, the sound cutting through the room like a knife. Eleanor, sitting at the dining table, looked at him sharply. "Are you going to get that?" His legs felt leaden as he crossed the room to the phone. He picked up the receiver, his hand trembling. "Hello?" A pause, then a voice, low, calm, and unmistakable. "Mr. Mercer." James gritted his teeth. "Stanton." "We've got another development," Stanton said. "Thought you'd want to know." "What now?" James asked, the weariness clear in his voice. "We traced the ring's purchase to a sales associate who remembers the transaction," Stanton said, his tone infuriatingly casual. "Says the buyer looked a lot like you." James's heart sank. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Stanton said. "Look, Mercer, I don't care if you bought the ring or if someone's playing games with us. What I care about is getting to the bottom of this. So here's what we're going to do. You're coming in tomorrow morning. We've got some questions, and I expect some answers." James gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles white. "I told you I didn't buy it. Someone's framing me." "Then you've got nothing to worry about," Stanton said smoothly. "See you at 9. The line went dead. James slammed the receiver down, the sound reverberating through the room. He turned to find Eleanor watching him, her face pale. "What is it?" "They're saying a clerk at the jewelry store identified me as the buyer," James said, his voice shaking. "They want me to come in tomorrow." Eleanor stood, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "James, this has to stop. We need to figure out who's doing this to you." "I know," James said. "But how? Whoever's behind this is 3 steps ahead of me." Eleanor hesitated, then said, "What if it's someone at the restaurant?" James frowned. "Chez Marcel?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "You said both you and Vivian were regulars there. What if someone saw you, made an assumption, and decided to stir up trouble?" James considered this. It wasn't much, but it was better than the void of answers he'd been living in. "It's worth a shot," he said. "I'll go there tomorrow before the precinct. Maybe someone remembers something." The next morning, James arrived at Chez Marcel just after it opened. The familiar smell of butter and garlic wafted through the air, but the place felt alien to him now, each table and chair carrying the weight of unspoken accusations. A young waiter approached him, his face lighting up in recognition. "Mr. Mercer, haven't seen you in a while." James forced a smile. "Yeah, it's been a busy month. Say, I was wondering, do you remember a woman who used to come here? Dark hair, mid-30s, elegant. Vivian Grant." The waiter's smile faltered. "Sure, I remember her. She used to sit by the window. Real quiet, though. Didn't talk much." James's pulse quickened. "Did she ever mention me? Or talk about anyone she knew here?" The waiter shook his head. "Not that I recall. She mostly kept to herself." James tried another approach. "Do you remember seeing us here at the same time? Me and Vivian?" The waiter frowned, thinking. "Maybe once or twice, but I couldn't say for sure. It's been a while." James's shoulders slumped. He felt the weight of disappointment settle over him, but before he could leave, the waiter said, "Wait, there was something weird, though." James turned back. "What?" "A couple weeks ago, this guy came in asking about you," the waiter said. "Real sharp-looking, like a lawyer or something. Said he needed to know your schedule here. I thought it was strange, but he said it was for work, so—" James felt a chill run down his spine. "Did he give you his name?" The waiter shook his head. "No, but he left a big tip. Seemed real insistent." James nodded, his mind racing. He thanked the waiter and left the restaurant. the pieces beginning to shift into place. Someone had been watching him, gathering details about his life. And whoever it was, they'd gone to great lengths to ensure he looked guilty. But why? By the time James arrived at the precinct, he felt more resolute than he had in days. Stanton greeted him with his usual smirk, but James cut him off before he could speak. "Detective," James said firmly, "I think someone's been following me, setting me up." Stanton raised an eyebrow. "Go on." James took a deep breath. "A waiter at Chez Marcel said a man came in a few weeks ago asking about me, my schedule, my habits. Whoever he was, he's the one you should be looking for." Stanton's smirk faded, replaced by a look of genuine interest. "You've got a name?" "Not yet," James admitted. "But if you're serious about finding the truth, maybe it's time you stopped chasing me and started chasing the real suspect." Stanton leaned back in his chair, studying James for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Mercer. Let's see where this leads." The shift in Stanton's demeanor gave James a brief glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. The detective, though more open to James's claims, wasn't about to let him off the hook without further evidence. The weight of suspicion still pressed heavily on James's shoulders as he left the precinct, his mind churning with questions. Who had been asking about him at Chez Marcel? And why go to such lengths to tie him to Vivian Grant? Back home, Eleanor was waiting for him, her anxiety etched across her face. "What happened?" she asked as soon as he stepped through the door. "They're starting to listen," James said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. "I told them about the man at the restaurant." "And do they think it's connected?" "They didn't dismiss it," James said. "But they're not letting me off the hook either." Eleanor crossed her arms, pacing the living room. "This has gone on long enough, James. Whoever's doing this isn't going to stop until they've destroyed you." "I know," James said, sinking onto the couch. "But I don't know where to start. Whoever this is, they're always a step ahead." Eleanor paused, her brow furrowing. "What about the ring?" she said suddenly. James looked up. "What about it?" "Stanton said they're tracing it, right? If they find out who bought it, maybe it'll lead back to this man." James frowned, considering this. It was a long shot, but it was better than sitting idle. "I'll call Stanton," he said, reaching for the phone. The next day, Stanton called back with news. "We tracked down the jeweler who sold the ring," he said. "He remembers the buyer clearly." James's heart raced. "And?" "The buyer matched your description, Mr. Mercer. Mid-30s, dark hair, well-dressed, paid in cash." James frowned. "You already told me this. Someone's impersonating me." "Maybe," Stanton said. "But here's the interesting part. The jeweler said the buyer had an odd request. They wanted the ring engraved." James's stomach tightened. "Engraved?" "Yep, and guess what the engraving said?" Stanton's voice was laced with grim satisfaction. "To V, all my love, J." James felt his breath catch. The initials felt like a knife twist. He had no explanation for this. None. "I didn't do this," he managed. "I don't even know her." "That's what you keep saying," Stanton replied coolly. "But the engraver's records match the ring and the date of sale. Whoever bought it wanted to make sure Vivian knew it came from someone with the initials JM. Determined to fight back, James spent the next several days retracing his steps, desperate for any clue that could clear his name. He visited the jewelry store himself, spoke with the jeweler, and examined the ledger where his name had been signed. The handwriting wasn't his, but it was close enough to cast doubt. Meanwhile, Stanton began digging into Vivian Grant's life. "She was married," he told James during one of their tense meetings. "Husband's name is Richard Grant. Wealthy, runs a big export business. He was out of the country at the time of her death. Alibi checks out." "What about their relationship?" James asked. "Any trouble there?" "Plenty," Stanton said. "Neighbors say they fought a lot. Word is, she was planning to leave him." James leaned forward, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. What if her husband's behind this? Maybe he found out she was leaving and wanted to pin it on someone else. Stanton raised an eyebrow. Interesting theory. You think he hired someone to frame you? It makes sense, doesn't it? James said. He had the motive, the resources, and if he's as powerful as you say, he could easily hire someone to follow me, forge my name, and plant evidence. Stanton tapped his pen against his notebook, considering. It's possible, he admitted, but we'll need proof. That night, as James and Eleanor sat together in the living room, the phone rang again. James froze, his heart pounding, but Eleanor grabbed the receiver before he could. "Hello?" she said sharply. A pause. Then her expression darkened. "Who is this?" James watched her, his chest tightening. "What is it?" he whispered. Eleanor handed him the phone, her hand trembling. "It's him." James took the receiver, his voice shaking. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end was calm, almost amused. "You know who I am, Mr. Mercer." James's grip tightened. "If you think you're going to get away with this—" "Oh, but I already have," the voice said smoothly. "You've been dancing to my tune since the very beginning." "Why me?" James demanded. "Why frame me?" There was a chuckle, low and sinister. "Because you were convenient, a nobody with just enough connection to make it believable. But don't take it personally, Mr. Mercer. It's just business." The line went dead. James stared at the receiver, his mind reeling. Eleanor was at his side in an instant. "Who was it? What did he say?" "It's him," James said, his voice hollow. "The one behind everything. He admitted it." Eleanor's eyes widened. "What do we do?" James clenched his jaw, a fire igniting in his chest. "We fight back. I'm not letting him destroy me." James sat alone in the dark, the weight of the last few weeks pressing on him like a vice. Eleanor had gone to bed hours ago, her faith in him strained to its breaking point. The phone sat on the table in front of him, silent and unassuming, yet it felt like a loaded gun. Then it rang. James stared at it, his pulse racing. Whoever was on the other end had been toying with him, orchestrating the chaos that now consumed his life. With a trembling hand, he picked up the receiver. "You're persistent," James said, his voice low and sharp. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer," the voice replied, smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who always held the upper hand. "I see you've started to understand the game." "I know it's you," James said. "Richard Grant." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "Clever, but a bit late, don't you think?" "You killed your wife," James said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but he knew they were true. "You set me up to take the fall." "Very good," Grant said, his tone laced with mockery. "Though you missed the finer details. It wasn't just about her. You were convenient, yes, but also necessary." "Why?" James demanded. "Why me?" "Because you were there, Mr. Mercer, always at the right place at the right time, sitting at the same restaurant, her gaze lingering on you, just long enough for me to see it. Do you know what jealousy does to a man?" James clenched the receiver, his knuckles white. "This was about your ego?" "It was about control," Grant said, his voice hardening. "Vivian was going to leave me. She'd grown tired of the life I gave her, and for what? To chase meaningless flings like you?" "No, Mr. Mercer. She had to learn there's a price for betrayal." "I never—" James started, but Grant cut him off. "Whether you were involved or not is irrelevant," Grant said. "You were a pawn, Mr. Mercer, a piece in a larger game, and now you've served your purpose." Before James could respond, the line went dead. James didn't sleep that night. He spent hours replaying the conversation, the pieces finally clicking into place. Grant's jealousy, his need for control, his carefully orchestrated plan to destroy his wife and leave James as the scapegoat, it all fit. But there was one thing Grant hadn't counted on. James wasn't done fighting. The next day, James met with Stanton, laying everything on the table. The phone calls, the conversation with Grant, the lingering questions about the man who'd been asking about him at Chez Marcel. Stanton listened intently, his expression unreadable. "You're saying Grant admitted to framing you?" Stanton asked when James finished. "Yes," James said, "but he's careful. He won't leave a paper trail." Stanton nodded slowly. "It's a start. If he's as arrogant as you say, he'll slip up eventually." James's breath hitched. "Eventually? That's not good enough? My life is falling apart." "We'll keep digging," Stanton said, "but you need to be patient." James stood, the frustration boiling over. "Patient? I've been patient. And in the meantime, my wife barely trusts me. My reputation is in shreds, and you're still not convinced I'm innocent." Stanton sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll get him, Mercer, but you have to let us do our job." Weeks passed. Stanton and his team began quietly investigating Grant, unraveling the threads of his alibi and following the faint trails he'd left behind. Meanwhile, James struggled to rebuild his life. Eleanor, though still wary, stood by him, her faith slowly rekindled by his unwavering resolve. Finally, one crisp autumn morning, Stanton called. "We've got him," Stanton said, a rare note of satisfaction in his voice. "Turns out your instincts were right. Grant made a critical mistake, a forged business receipt to cover his return flight the night Vivian died. He was in Chicago the whole time." James's heart pounded. "What happens now?" "We're arresting him today," Stanton said. "And with your testimony about that phone call, he doesn't stand a chance." The news of Grant's arrest spread quickly. The scandal rocked the city, his carefully curated image as a wealthy, untouchable businessman crumbling under the weight of his crimes. For James, it was vindication. Proof that he'd been telling the truth all along. But as he and Eleanor sat together that evening, watching the sun set over the city, James couldn't shake the lingering shadow of Grant's voice in his mind. "You've served your purpose?" Eleanor squeezed his hand, pulling him back to the present. "It's over," she said softly. James nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. The nightmare had ended, but the scars it left behind would take much longer to heal.
This was A Call in the Dark by N. Laverty, an original story produced by Nocturnal Tales.